So, in the wake of the Mario Galaxy movie, it was only natural that Nintendo would want a new Mario title on store shelves. One wonders why Nintendo didn't release the Switch reissues of Galaxy 1 and 2 closer to the movie's premiere, but alas, instead we get Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, plus Meetup at Bellebel Park to wet the warp whistle, and admittedly, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect from this project. Pretty much everything around the pre-release marketing for this expansion focused primarily on the multiplayer. And I do mean multiplayer, we'll get to that in a moment, minigames, and so I wasn't exactly hyped since I vastly prefer single-player content to multiplayer. I understand why Nintendo wants to focus on the latter since it's become a staple of 2D Mario ever since the days of the Wii, but nevertheless I found myself slightly disappointed that this expansion seemed to be pushing solo players to the side. But thankfully I was proven wrong on that front, as Nintendo made sure to indeed have a little something for everyone. The basic setup is nothing to write home about. A new area called Bellebel Park pops up on the map, the Koopalings show up to steal a MacGuffin from it, and you gotta stop them, all the while training with the Toad Brigade. While there are some cute character moments like Captain Toad picking up a little Poplin recruit and giving you updates on their adventures throughout the Flower Kingdom, story's not really what you're here for. Shocking to hear about a Mario game, I know. The plot is more of an excuse to get you into the new area more than anything, so once you are in, the game doesn't dwell on it. No, once you're in Bellebel Park, your intention is going to be split between two things: the Camp Central, where you'll find a collection of solo challenges, and the Attraction Central, where you'll find the multiplayer games. And you know, for all the focus these minigames got in the run-up to this expansion's release, they're surprisingly insubstantial, not to mention annoyingly obtuse to even start. You see, the game doesn't let you play with CPU opponents or even just against online randoms, so unless you round up some friends in an online lobby, or, Sobek forbid, actually have real people over, you're not going to be touching these with a 10-foot flagpole, which is such an odd decision to me. If you're going to go through all the effort of cheerleading these minigames in your marketing, then you can at least give the lonely spods in your audience some way to play them, even if it's just through matches against computer players. Still, once you do round up some friends to play with, the multiplayer games are ultimately just fine. They're a fun distraction, but once you've played them 2 or 3 times, you've seen all they have to offer. Some of the ideas here are cute, like having a version of hide and seek where you disguise yourself as a background element, essentially creating the 2D Mario equivalent of prop hunt, but once you've played them all once or twice, there's nothing drawing you back to play them again. No, the real meat of this expansion comes in the Toad Brigade training, where you get more than 70 challenges, each one a remixed level from the base game, with a new twist like staying invincible until the goal by touching stars, not touching any coins, or killing all the enemies within a time limit. There's a good amount of variety, and each challenge is quick, snappy, and has a good sense of difficulty that gives you a struggle without becoming too much of a pain, at least at first. Once you get through some of the later challenges, oh boy, the game really kicks it up a notch, and I genuinely don't think I've encountered 2D Mario challenges this hard before. By the end, this title is going to test your platforming mettle, and I found myself trying again and again, only to barely scrape to the goal successfully. It's especially satisfying for a completionist since you get little rewards and patches along the way as a counter telling you how many courses you have until the next unlock. It all scratches that little part of my brain that isn't happy unless every single medal, coin, and toad-shaped indent has been filled on the in-game menu. It's honestly the perfect reason to jump back in and sink hours upon hours into Mario Wonder and scratch that itch for 2D Mario until the next game. But if I had any complaints, it would be that the difficulty maybe jumps a little too quickly. You go from these fairly easy challenges in the beginning before the game immediately whips out its spike-laden schlong and beats you into the fucking dirt. But honestly, that's kind of my jam when it comes to platformers. I'm not normally one for games that sell themselves on their difficulty, but I've always had a soft spot when it comes to titles such as Super Meat Boy or I Wanna Be the Guy, and that's exactly what some of the harder levels in Bellebel Park remind me of. I just wish there was a better ramp up and more levels that find a balance where they're difficult enough to stimulate without being too hard. The later levels make me feel like I might as well be jumping into a rabid tiger pit with nothing but a plastic spork to defend myself for all the chance I'll have to actually succeed. Still, there's a good amount new here, so if you're looking to jump back in, then I'd say the $20 is worth it for the training camp alone. And good on that, because the expansion's other offerings come and go from the mind like the name of the DoorDash driver bringing me my 2am McNuggies after I've gone through my nightly Fireball party bucket. I've already mentioned the multiplayer games, but there's also new boss fights against the Koopalings. And as a side note, as someone who grew up playing New Super Mario Bros. On the DS, it's disappointing that 2D Mario still clings to the Koopalings as its only options for bosses. Not to say I dislike the characters or anything, but after seeing them as the boss roster in almost every 2D Mario since free on the NES, I see them as has more of a mundanity than anything else. Thankfully, Bellebel Park tries to address that by giving each of the Koopalings Wonder Forms, new transformation and abilities that radically change their usual routines. Wendy becomes a big Bertha, Larry becomes a crystal golem with, might I add, some wonderfully good animations. The way he moves through these stiff, limited movements that almost make it seem like his body is cracking and repairing is a nice touch, but I digress. My personal favorite is probably Morton's fight where he becomes a giant puppet and you literally have to pull his strings to cause damage. It's all quite clever, and if Nintendo is going to be so insistent on using the Koopalings again, then these Wonder Form remixes are a fun twist on proceedings, but my problem is that they're just sort of there. You can just run up to them, do the fight, and then move on. The tallest hurdle I had getting to these fights was finding them on the overworld map. Maybe these fights fit better into a new playthrough where you're unlocking worlds as you go, but having come back to a file that's already completed the main story means I was able to just run through fight after fight and finish them all within the day. Perhaps the fight should have been tied closer to the training camp in some way, like you beat enough challenges or earn a certain patch, then the boss fight would unlock, but as it is, the boss fights feel weirdly disconnected from the training camp when ideally, I feel as if one should feed into the other. The most they intersect is that the harder versions of the fights are some of the challenges in the training camp, but even then, they feel tacked on in the extras tab. Again, it feels so weird how the very selling points of this expansion seem to be what got the least amount of attention, and while the boss fights are ultimately fun and something that Wonder kind of needed since the base game had a whopping total of 2 boss fights, one you repeat ad nauseum for almost every world, I can't help but find myself wishing these Koopaling battles were a little more well integrated into either expansion or even the base game, like if you needed a certain amount of Wonder Seeds to even try them. Still, they're fun for what they are, so I suppose I can't give them too much shit. Overall, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, plus Meetup in Bellebel Park, here's hoping this is the last time I have to say that full title again, because fuck me, what a snoutful, is a pretty premium package that does its best to paste over the base game's crack. The new bosses are fun, even if they do kind of feel awkwardly detached from the rest of the experience. The training camp's collection of courses is a nice meaty bit of new content to sink your teeth into, and will probably get you at least another 3 or 4 hours out of the game, especially since you'll be doing some of those later ones about 10,000 times before you can actually beat them. And the minigames are fun little diversions that are a good way to kill time if you've got friends, family, or drinking mates all huddled around the console. So, while it's not particularly mind-blowing, this expansion does hit upon all the strongest elements of 2D Mario and wraps them up in a neat little bow. In fact, while the bar is low, I'd go so far as to say this might be tied with Forgotten Lands expansion, Star-Crossed Worlds, as the best of the Switch 2 editions. If you're looking for some Mario fun after that big movie and still waiting on the next big 3D adventure, then this should tie you over. Now, if we can only get Nintendo to actually think up some new boss fights for the next 2D game, perhaps a penultimate battle against Chris Pratt in a recording booth, kicking Koopa shells into his shins until he finally puts some fucking emotion in his voice acting. So, that's my thoughts on the Switch 2 edition of Mario Wonder. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that funny YouTube things, and above all, always remember to crank up the noise.